Wow. What is the sound of now? Right now, for me, there's a lot of noise and raucousness and people are talking over each other. We're not always listening to each other. I constantly hear people talking over each other. There's a kind of, for me, if you were to talk about it musically, we're definitely not in some kind of harmonious call and response. I think we're much more at the moment where we're kind of converging into a sort of dissonance and chaos. I do think that sometimes out of the dissonance comes a voice that then says to us something humanist about us as South Africans. I think that we have to almost pull ourselves back and go quieter. I'm Philip Miller, composer based in Cape Town, South Africa. I think I'm a bit of a sound magpie. I mean, a lot of people listen constantly to sound. So if I'm in Paris, recently I was listening to all the sounds on the metro when the door opens. There's a very particular pitch. And then I was listening in Rio to a similar kind of sound on the train station. And then I started to think, oh, let me record these. And I pick up sounds wherever I go. They kind of are like a library, a store, or like if you were writing little notes, sticky notes on your board that you thought, let me think about that for later. So I am constantly picking up sounds from wherever I am. I think to some extent my language has been formed through the sound worlds, the music, to sort of include all of those things, the voices, the rhythms, the beats, everything, the emotions of sound, of the sonic world of South Africa, particularly Johannesburg, where I had worked most of my life. And I'm always very aware of the uniqueness of those sounds, whether it's speaking, whether it's singing, whether it's rhythms that you start to hear. The pieces, there are two, are very much connected to a lot of my history with the work of William Kentridge. The first piece is called Counting Numbers, and it is a meditation on the numbers, the vast numbers of Black Africans who died in the First World War in Africa. This is a really part of the history of the First World War that has not really been looked at, and in some ways it's a hidden history. It's a history that is shameful for many South Africans who perhaps didn't even know about this. The other piece is really a piece that I've celebrate also from my life in Johannesburg, because in fact I have worked and lived in Johannesburg for a vast amount of time before I moved down to Cape Town. But the piece in Johannesburg really, it's called A Canon for Isaiah Shembe.
Vishnu started a new Christian community, and whose wisdom created a satisfactory compromise between two religious points of view, the African and the European. Towards the end of the last day of the 2 weeks pilgrimage.
And it really is a piece that looks at the sound world of Johannesburg. During the time I lived in Johannesburg, I was always aware, actually, on a Saturday, sometimes on a Sunday, how if you drove through the city, you would hear these extraordinary horn sounds, something a little bit like a vuvuzela, but not quite, something a little bit like horns from a honking of a car horn, but also voice and singing. And I was really struck always by the soundtrack, because there are soundtracks to living in Johannesburg, whether it's the taxis, the sounds of hawkers on the streets, the shembe. There's so many in the suburbs, the sounds of electric fences, in the, all of these things, the Hadija, all of that soundscape of a Joburg sound world informed me in a way in my life in Joburg that made me want to make a piece that kind of talked to a very particular sound world, and that was the sound of the Shembe Church, which, as you know, is a very huge, enormous following of, I think, 3-4 million people. And I loved these long bugle horns, and I used to go and stand at the outside in the various different parts of Joburg and Jeppes Town and stand and listen to it and watch the kind of dance and the circles of people moving and playing these long, almost like angels, horns or bugles of angels. The sort of, you see them in medieval paintings. And I took that as the inspiration to make a piece that also in some ways brings Johannesburg into Cape Town, into the Zuidsmukke. I studied classical music, but then I moved from classical music into a sort of very non-classical, much more open world of all kinds of different music in South Africa, which you have to do if you really want to embrace South African music and culture, that you can't just think in narrow ways. So I've always been open to many worlds of sound and music.